It's great to be able to join you in this webinar. Paul's asked me to take a brief outsider's view of Orthodoxy. And so I apologize to my Orthodox colleagues for any mistakes that I make on the way through, and I'm sure they will correct them. But I want to make 4 observations. When I think of the Orthodox, I think of friends of mine, some lay, others ordained. And what impresses me most about them is the quality of their faithfulness and the genuineness of their friendship. There's nothing easy about being Orthodox. You have to live your life to a different liturgical rhythm to the Western Church, as Paul has just told us. So Christmas and Easter are often out of sync. And whereas fasting and abstinence has faded in Western Protestantism to, oh, I think I'll give up chocolate for Lent, in Orthodox life, it remains an important spiritual reality. And if you've ever attended the liturgy, you'll know that it needs a particular kind of stamina. So in a word then, Orthodoxy is distinctive. And that's my first observation. Being Orthodox is a serious and distinctive business. That distinctiveness is linked to language and culture. We know these churches in England largely as diaspora churches, although their histories here are longer than we sometimes realize. First Greek church in London, which had but a brief existence, was founded in 1677. And Orthodoxy's permanent presence grew from the Russian Embassy Chapel, which was established in 1716. However, it was successive waves of 20th century immigration, beginning with those who fled Russia post-1917, that brought a substantial Orthodox presence to England. Similarly, the Greek Archdiocese of Thyatira in Great Britain celebrates its centenary next year, founded as it was in 1922 after the Greco-Turkish War of 1919 to 22, which led to the displacement of over 1 million Greeks and Turks. So it's important to remember then that Greek and Russian Orthodoxy have been part of British church history for a century and more. One of the most significant people in English Orthodoxy has been Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, now aged, I think, 86 or 87. And Metropolitan Kallistos reflects that when he became Orthodox in 1958, Orthodox services in England were either in Greek or Slavonic or Serbian. And to hear English spoken by an Orthodox priest was unusual. Now, he argues, it's rare to find the Divine Liturgy celebrated with no use of English, and relatively common to find it celebrated entirely in English. Orthodoxy, he suggests, is much less foreign to us now than it used to be. And that's partly because of the long involvement of the Orthodox in ecumenical life, which includes being founder members of CTE when the new ecumenical instruments were formed in 1990. That includes the Russians and the Greeks and the Armenians and the Copts, who were in membership then through the Council of Oriental Orthodox Churches, but along with others are now members in their own right. And there are now 8 Orthodox churches in the membership of CTE. But Metropolitan Kallistos's point is well made. Part of the Orthodox experience is, of course, that of diaspora communities, as the world's population has become more globalized. People want to worship in the comfort of their own languages and traditions, just as we English seek out English-speaking churches when we're on holiday or working abroad. But Orthodoxy is also an increasingly Western as well as an Eastern phenomenon. In part, that was the result of the historical processes of the early 20th century, and in particular, the establishment of a Russian émigré community in Paris, with adjunct Orthodox theological institutes in its wake. But the wider process has also led to the establishment of a self-governing church, the American Orthodox Church. And the Orthodox word for that is autocephalous, self-governing. So a word of caution, though, for we British. These Orthodox churches may seem like new kids on the block in England, compared to the Roman Catholic Church, which has been here since Pope Gregory the Great dispatched Augustine to convert the English in 595. But in truth, Orthodox churches are the oldest churches in Christendom. And the history of Greek Christianity is continuous from the time of St. Paul. The Malankara Syrian Church, otherwise known as the Indian Orthodox Church, which is particularly associated with Kerala in southern India, harbours a tradition which dates back to Thomas the Apostle in the 1st century. And similarly, the Coptic tradition cherishes the memory of St. Mark, and there is clear evidence that Christianity flourished in Egypt by the mid-2nd century. Armenia was the first state to become Christian in 301. So when the Orthodox sit at the ecumenical table, they are far more than diasporic communities. They are the embodied link to the earliest days of the faith that we all share. And that's my second point. These churches may be relatively new to English experience, but they are the oldest churches in Christendom. And that leads me to a third outsider's impression. The churches of the East did not have a Reformation in the 16th century, nor an Enlightenment in the 18th, in the sense that we in the West did. Now, you can debate the details of that, but I think the broad point is valid. The Orthodox have a different intellectual history, and that has at least two consequences. The first is that Orthodox theology is deeply rooted in the thinking of the Greek fathers of the early centuries and the earliest ecumenical councils from 325 to 787, and their continuous interpretation since then. And it's in the prayer life and worship of those early 4th century fathers like St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil the Great that we find the roots of the liturgy. Liturgy develops and changes, of course, but Orthodox liturgy cherishes and values tradition. And the second consequence is that some Orthodox theologians are deeply suspicious of trends in Western theology and intellectual life. Orthodoxy has never experienced the split between theology and thought on the one hand and spirituality on the other, which is characteristic of the West. So in their eyes, Western theology has become divorced from the experience of God, which is an integral part of the liturgy and monastic life for them, which may be why all Orthodox bishops are monks. Maybe you can tell me that. Western theology and church life has also been seen as overly enthralled to the power of reason and to undue individualism. And this is a source of tension. And like all tensions, whether they are creative or destructive depends on our willingness to engage with each other. Those subjects which are high on the Western world's agenda, the role of women, sexuality and gender, race and nationalism, are all ones in which we can engage in dialogue together, not least ecumenically. And it is important to realize how diverse the spectrum of thought is in both East and West, although clearly the Orthodox stance is generally more conservative than the Western. Conversation will become all the more important as the Orthodox become ever more significant members of Western culture in their own right. And it's important to recognize that for some in the West, like Metropolitan Callistos himself, there is a winsome attractiveness about traditions that are so profoundly connected with the origins of Christianity and have sought to preserve that continuity. And that leads me to my final observation as an outsider bred in Protestantism. There's something gloriously attractive about the positivity of Orthodox theology. It stresses on the resurrection and glory of Christ, the goodness and wonder of God's creation, and our duty to preserve and cherish it, on the value of each human person as made in the image of God, and with the potential of sharing the very life of the Trinity, of the closeness of the saints and the Mother of God, and of course the wonderful music of the liturgy and the whole prayerful spiritual interface between heaven and earth, which is the icon. That's not to deny the seriousness of sin and the fall for orthodoxy, but there is in orthodoxy a different center of theological gravity. We have so much to discover together about the sheer wonder of God's love and what that means for human beings and the cosmos that we have been given. And for my part, I look forward to learning more from my Orthodox friends. So to summarize my 4 points, being Orthodox is a serious and distinctive business. These churches may be relatively new to English experience, but they are the oldest churches in Christendom. Thirdly, the Orthodox have a different intellectual history. And fourth, they have a different and more joyful center of theological gravity. Thank you for your patience.